Welcome to Grow in the Middle podcast. I'm your host, Mariah Krystal, founder and principal coach of AYC Consulting Group, also known as Authentically You Coaching. Grow in the Middle podcast is about real truths of growing successful careers, the good, the bad, the great, and the ugly. Here we're going to talk about navigating imposter syndrome, leaning into discomfort, and learning about roles that aren't always spotlighted or deemed glamorous. Every episode is short, actionable, and designed to give you practical insights, honest stories, and guidance to grow your career with clarity and authenticity. Whether you're aiming for a promotion, pivoting into a new role, or just trying to figure out your next steps, this podcast is where you're going to thrive in spaces that matter the most. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Grow in the Middle. I'm your host, Mariah Krystal. This week on Grow in the Middle, I'm sitting down with someone who spent the last decade navigating the growths, challenges, and the evolution of hiring, from bootstrap startups to unicorns. Andrew Shapiro has built his career at 3 SaaS companies, each at different stages of explosive growth. He's been a candidate, interviewer, sat on leadership teams, and an advisor, working directly with recruiting teams from recruiters to CHROs to CEOs. After witnessing firsthand how layoffs in 2020 and 2022 disrupted careers, Andrew made a bold move, leaving his job in 2023 to dedicate himself to solving a massive gap, helping more people get hired by improving the interview process for both the candidate and the interviewers. In this episode, we're diving into the journey of learning and growing, how career evolution is a continuous process, what makes hiring so broken, and how candidates can navigate the system, the reality of layoffs and career pivots, lessons from the inside, and how to build a career that aligns with your skills and your growth. Andrew's the founder of Dot Community, an initiative focused on hiring more effectively. He's also an advisor for startups, covering sales and customer success, an active mentor, and a nonprofit board member. Andrew, welcome to the show.
I am honored to be here. Always been a fan of your work, and I know so many others are, and I'm excited to talk to you today. So thank you for having me.
Yes. One thing I'll say, I met Andrew, I don't know, has it been a year yet? It's been a year since we met, right?
Yes, yeah.
We met. I forget exactly how we connected, but I remember being in a space where I was just like, I wasn't laid off at that point, but I think I was just like trying to transition.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember how we connected, but meeting you, you are one of the most genuine, down to earth, like just nicest people I've met. And it's not a lot of nice people in the world, so it's not enough. And
Hopefully we get more.
yeah, and I just, if I haven't said this before, I truly appreciate you, especially during that time, just being so kind and being so welcoming. And as you know, I mention your name in rooms all the time because I truly appreciate just you as a genuine person, because like I said, there's not many, and it speaks to your journey, actually speaks to who you are as a person. So I would love for you to share a little bit more about how you got started and then up until where you are now.
Yeah, and thank you so much. No, I mean, I vividly remember us having our first couple conversations, and there are a lot of things that I learned from you as well. Just hearing your journey and what you were mapping through in your life, and you're so entrepreneurial. I mean, look at this. This is an
Yeah.
incredible setup here, right? So, I think that we've had a lot of good conversations through the past year plus. And again, thank you for having me. I have a fun background. Yeah, I mean, everyone has a fun background, but I come from a background of, just like you mentioned, over 10 years of SaaS sales, account management, and enablement at 3 different startups across 3 different phases. So
Mhm.
the first startup that I worked for, I think we were like 30 or 35 people, and I saw that organization go from $5 million in annual recurring revenue to about 10. And I left for another organization, and that organization is called Lever. They were actually acquired 2 years ago, but Lever is an applicant tracking system. So whenever somebody applies for a job, the career site that's hosting all of those jobs that you're looking for, and then when you submit your application, that's all Lever, and it goes into a system where the recruiters and really the company as a whole can see your information with the right, obviously the correct security badges, but see your information, put you through the interview process. And so that is where I really got a lot of my understanding of what talent acquisition is all about. I think the other thing is I joined that company when they were probably 40 people. And so I watched that company grow from $12 million in ARR to 25 by the time I left. And we went from 40 people to 250 people across 2 different countries. So that's where I really started to learn about company growth and what sales meant. That's when I transitioned to account management and customer success. And then the third company I joined was still in the talent acquisition space. It's a company called Handshake. And I joined Handshake as one of the first enterprise account managers. And there were, I think, 3 of us and a manager at the time with 7 CSMs. And when I left 2 years ago, that organization, that department had grown to over 100 people with 3 different functions, multiple leadership levels. And I had the privilege of running enablement for that department. So I onboarded 43 of those 100 people, which was really
Wow.
fun. So, yeah, then to your point, I think I'm really lucky. I got to work every day at an applicant tracking system and at Handshake, which is the place to go to hire early talent.
Hmm.
I got to work with, like you mentioned, CHROs, chief talent officers, chief people officers, all the way through their department of people who are recruiting, right? So all the levels, and learn what it was like to specifically interview. A lot of interview processes, a lot of strategic conversations, different startups, different organizations outside of tech. So I could keep going, but that maybe gives the foundation of my journey in my career aspect, and then also what led me to do what I do today.
No, I love that. There's a couple things because I always like to break down the lingo. So I know what ARR is. ARR
Sorry.
is. No, it's okay. It's I do it all the time. I know what it is, but if you can explain it to our audience and then also throw in CHRO. I had to look that one up. I was like, what is that?
Yeah, really good questions. Okay, so and also I threw some terms around in terms of like titles that maybe people don't know. So first of all, ARR, to your point, that stands for annual recurring revenue, which means in SaaS, which is software as a service in the tech world, when you pay for a service, you're paying it on an annual basis, right? It could even be like if you're thinking about Netflix or Amazon Prime or some kind of annual subscription, you're paying for that, or the contract that you're signing is annual.
Hmm.
And why that's so important, for many reasons, I'll give you one, is that it provides a little bit of the business some predictability of if people are going to be paying year over year and spending more money with you. So annual recurring revenue is a metric inside of the tech world
Hmm.
that helps people know how the business is doing, but it's also a metric that helps people know measurement wise where they're at. So those numbers I gave you, 5 to 10, 12 to 25, and then Handshake, actually, I didn't give it to you. Handshake grew from 18 to 110 by the time I left.
Which is
It,
crazy.
it is crazy. And they're doubling that since, yeah. So it's really interesting. The reason why I say these things for the audience is so that they have an understanding of it's not just the employee size, but it's also the amount of money that's coming in so that they know there's so many different processes, changes, tech stacks, all of these kinds of things that changed in those different periods. So let me stop there. That was ARR. I can go through some other things, but was that helpful or
No, that's super helpful. I think it gives some insight into because we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the changes that happen. And then CHRO, what was that
yes.
one?
Chief Human Resource Officer. Yeah. So
Ah.
so much respect for these people. CHROs, they are the C-level executives that and leaders for organizations that really have a lot under their umbrella for what they're responsible for. Talent acquisition is can be one of those things, but also when you think of HR, there are so many other things under that umbrella, like diversity, equity, inclusion,
Mhm.
um, in terms of like policies of remote work. Since I was just recently talking with someone about that, right? These are human resource executives that are focused on the greater company as a whole. How do we keep things running? And
Mhm.
also, how do we do things legally and correct in many different ways when it comes to setting our employees up for success, whether they are going through the interview process and they're new employees or they've been with us for 10 years, however many years, or if they're actually leaving, right? Exit interviews and things like that. How do we do our best for our future, current, and our past employees?
Yeah, which I think is so important. One of the things that I'm really excited to talk about with you is the broken state of interviewing and its
Yeah.
impact. Me personally, I've been able to interview as an interviewer, obviously, and an interviewee. But as an interviewer, I've interviewed over 100 candidates, and I can
Wow.
say, like, over my career, and I can say I've had some really great interviews as an interviewer, and then others I've been like, that didn't go so well, or maybe I wasn't as prepared. And then vice versa on the other side, as an interviewee, same thing. I've had great interviews, and then others, it's just like, what's happening here? So
Yeah.
I would really love for you to give some give your point of view of like why it's broken, and some of the biggest flaws, and then we can talk a little bit more about like what you're doing to help fix that.
Yeah. Okay. So I get excited about this topic because, to your point, there's so many incredible people that these interviews go really well, whether you're the candidate or the interviewer. And there are other ones that don't go as well. And at first, I was really upset because I thought it was on me or something was going. But it's just because there's not a lot of training in this space or not a lot of certifications that are readily available. So just to give you a metric, you and the audience a metric, I spoke with 129 people who were founders, hiring managers, leaders that are either in sales or customer success or throughout the business, and also individual contributors at various companies, right? It was all the way up to Google, down to a small startup. And out of 129 people, I asked all of them, like, have you been trained on how to interview? And I left trained to be defined by them. I didn't answer any. And out of 129, nine said they had been trained on how to interview.
That sounds that sounds about right.
Yeah.
That sounds about
So,
right.
and I mean, until I worked at Lever, which was an applicant tracking system, like I hadn't been trained on how to interview. And so it was really eye opening for me. And so, to your point of how this is broken, I think there are some incredible leaders, whether they're in sales or customer success or at the organization, a leader at the organization, and they are trained or they've done enough work where they feel like they can facilitate a training, but they might not have the time or the energy or the space to go back and train their interviewers on how to do that. And so what that leads to is either candidates who are really good talent coming to an organization and it's a mismatch and unfortunately they have to leave, or it leads to candidates that might not be the best match coming into an organization and again they have to leave. And people think that it's just time or money.
Mhm.
It's not. It's so much more of that. So there were eight or nine when I that was one of my next questions was like, hey, what does it cost if you hire the wrong person? And so sales leaders and customer success leaders have it to a science. Their answer was, depending on the size of the organization, it costs, first of all, hundreds of thousands of dollars if you hire the wrong person, paying
Mhm.
salary, they're negotiated, like if they negotiated a draw, which means like automatically you give me my commission because if I'm getting onboarded for the first 3 months, I obviously can't sell, so give me my commission first.
Mhm.
Healthcare, benefits, desk space, right? That adds up. But what is the biggest cost is if you when you first get hired, think of it as like a graph. When you first get hired, it's the time amount of time you're there and then your production is like up and down. From day zero, you are losing the company money because you're not bringing any money in as a sales rep or a customer success person. So you're losing company money day 1, 2, 3, 4, 30. Day 45, it starts to come back up because you do start to learn things and you're starting to reach out to customers. It goes back up, up, up. So it takes about 6 to 9 months for you to break even on a sales or customer success hire.
Mhm.
And within 3 months, if you make the wrong hire and you know within 3 months or 6 months even, it takes another 1 or 2 months to the right way have someone exit your organization. You
Mhm.
never want to say you're done and that's it, no severance, no exit interview, nothing, right?
Mhm.
So all these months are adding up to this huge problem, which you mentioned why interviewing is broken. You're not getting trained. You might be hiring the wrong person. Then you have to exit them or they exit upon themselves. And then you have to start this cycle over. You have to source people, you have to interview them, you have to hire them, you have to train them, you have to hope they get profitable. So, yeah, I think I'm not. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the broken cycle, but for me, that's initially what I found through all these 129 plus conversations.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. That ramp period is so important. And a lot of times people say like, we want you ramped in 3 months, and depending on the organization and what you're doing, might be feasible, but might, if you have great training, if you came in, it was very clear what you're doing. But to your point, um it takes so much time and effort to put into new hires. And I think the brokenness comes in when the internal teams are not aligned. So I'll speak from my point of view as a hiring manager, but then also as a candidate. As a hiring manager, I've been in positions where it's like, okay, hey, you're hiring 10 people over the next 2 quarters. Okay, I don't need 10 people. I don't need 10 people. No, no, but we've got the head count, so we're gonna do it. Okay, but I don't need 10 people. But okay, fine, So now let's go with that. Then I've got a team who I want, you have you usually as a hiring manager are like the last to go typically. You've got some people from your team that you're bringing on, and to your point, we've prepped them, but we didn't really train them. And by
Yeah,
prep them, gave them a list of like questions they should ask,
yeah,
things that they should think about, but we really didn't really tell them like what to look out for, right?
yeah,
Or if they had a concern, um like how to voice that concern, right? Those are some of the things that would come up. So then we have this long process of, you have your stage 1 interview, you have your screening, then you have your stage 2. You usually meet with somebody who would probably be on your team. Then you might have somebody who might be adjacent to your team. Then typically the hiring manager. So you've got these 4 stages, and you're pulling your team away to participate in this interview process. And on any given day, they might be prepped and ready to go. And then other days, this is not their priority. And so whatever you get from them, it could be a cluster of things. And so now you have to take all that together, and you now meet this person and you're like, did anybody go through the the basis of this role? Like, what's your understanding of the role? Well, they told me that you were going to give that to me. Oh, okay, wait a minute. So we didn't talk about like what we should be gathering. We didn't have a conversation beforehand. So I think, to your point, that training, to the point of having, what do I want to say? Going back to like the hiring, the headcount. If I don't need 10 people and I really need 5, but you're telling me I have to hire 10, there's a disconnect in this process. Because
mm-hmm.
as I'm going into hiring these people, it's like, me personally, I might be a little bit more lenient on the type of candidate, because I don't need 10 people. And
Right.
so I might be more flexible than I would be 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe they have the opportunity to grow. That's just me. Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and that point. There's also understanding like where to negotiate in the process. So there's just so many different things that like are not laid out at the very beginning. There's also the recruiter. There are a lot of recruiters. I have love and respect for recruiters, but a lot of recruiters who know the sales job, they've learned it, they've taken the time to understand it. Great. But there are a lot who do not.
Mm-hmm.
And for the ones that do not, if you're the first man on the job or woman on the job and you're screening, and the candidate is maybe a little nervous and they're not maybe articulating themselves the perfect way in the first 5 minutes, and you're not asking the questions to pull the answers out a little bit, then it's just like, okay, I don't ever get to meet that person. I'll never see that person. So I'm rambling here, but there's just like a
No.
lot of different things that come up. And then just from the interviewee side, I will say, I'll just say this. From the interviewee side, I think that people coming in and not having any background, and this almost sounds hypocritical, but any background on the candidate, like you have no idea why they're here, why they were chosen. why you're talking to them is a huge problem. Like, you know nothing about them at all. Your team hasn't been able to give you any feedback, so you're coming into this blind.
Yeah.
I think that there's I don't know. I think that there's an issue there. I think that, like, you need to have some idea of like where this person is coming from, what your team thinks, without being too biased. Like, hey, I think this could be a strong candidate, or here's what I want you to look out for.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop there, but I feel like on, on both sides it's a very weird process, and I've been on both sides of the spectrum, and I've done a great job in some aspects, and then I've done a terrible job in others, and realizing, like, after the fact, like, oh, how do we help this candidate even though they're not the right person for this role, if that makes sense.
No, everything you said, I'm nodding my head to. You're spot on. I think that once there is more information out there that actually helps the interviewer, then the candidates can reverse engineer that or use whatever term you'd like to understand how these things should work. And to your point on being the candidate, that should help you interview the company back, because every candidate should be interviewing the company. If they're not telling you in advance, here's what this conversation is about, we want to set you up for success to have this, that's a sign.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not, or if they are asking you questions that are illegal to ask, that's a sign. If you can tell that these people aren't trained, that's a sign, right? So there are plenty of things for both the interviewer, of course, but the candidate to improve on. And if there's just a place to go to get that information, or just learn from other leaders, learning from you, right? The things that you just mentioned, a lot of people will be able to learn. I learned from listening to you right now on what it's like to go through your unique process, whether you're an interviewer, hiring manager, or a candidate. Because everyone goes through that. It's a cycle, like you mentioned. You nailed it at the beginning, where everyone starts as a candidate, then they get hired on, and maybe they're an interviewer, or maybe they're helping somebody become an interviewer, or maybe they're helping a candidate, but they still are around interviewing, and they get promoted to a hiring manager or a leader. And then that hiring manager leader, guess what? They're not going to be at their org for their entire life. So they turn back into a candidate, and the cycle starts over and over and over again. So
Mm-hmm.
could not agree with you more on that.
Yeah, I think something also that affects that hiring process is the job description. Um, Job descriptions are often written as things that the aspirational things versus like what's happening right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, we want you to come in and build these things and work with the team who's currently doing XYZ. And then you get in and you're like, wait, you said build XYZ. You didn't say that there was like nothing here from the
Yeah.
start, or everything in here is aspirational. And to connect that to the interview, if the team also doesn't understand the job description, if the team doesn't understand what type of person is needed, like, do you need a generalist or a specialist, then it's hard to interview to that point. Because if you're talking to a specialist and this is all that they know and this is where their focus is, and the team is like, oh, well, they're not thinking more broadly, but we want somebody who's a little bit more, focused on this one particular area, then the feedback is going to be mixed matched, and it shouldn't be.
I'm going to take what you said before and expand on it. And it's not just recruiters, it's the company, right? Recruiters do a fantastic job. I'm a huge fan of recruiters. Their
Mm-hmm.
role is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
But when a company doesn't invest their time and resources into a recruiter that can help them figure out, who are we hiring for? What is the business impact this person's going to make? What are they going to accomplish in the first 90, let alone 1 year, 90 days, 1 year?
Mm-hmm.
When you're not aligned on these kinds of things, like you mentioned, you can't even start to have an interview, because you don't know what are the different stages you need to have in an interview. What are the different questions? Who is the person we need to evaluate? How are they evaluating? How are we going to make these decisions, right? These are all things that should be conversations that should be happening. But to your point, if you're not having those conversations first and then putting it in the job description, which is externally facing, you're not only going to you're going to set your team up for failure internally, but you're going to set the candidate up for failure as well, because they're going to read, that's the first thing they interact with besides your website. let me see what this job description is. And if it's not reflective of what you actually need to get done, or the team, or the resources, or lack thereof, it's going to cost you money. Like I said before, 6 to 9 months, at least hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit too about um, the emotional and psychological impact of hiring and
Yeah.
interviewing and layoffs and how that affects people and how they show up. We mentioned layoffs in 2020 and 2022 and how that drove you to really start your company and to
Yeah.
help people. What were some of the things that you were seeing and as a result of the layoffs, and what are you doing to help fix those things?
Yeah, really good question. So throughout my career, I've had people who I've partnered with, either I'm learning for them or they're learning from me, to how do I get better at interviewing? How do I practice interviewing, not only as an interviewer, but also as a candidate? And so when these massive layoffs hit, when it was in COVID or even after, as you mentioned, in 2022, through those years, I just had more people reach out to me and ask, like, hey, how do I interview? How should I go about this? And there wasn't one place to go to get better. So what I found myself doing and doing with others is I would go and create a Google search to see, like, what are the best, how do I get better at interviewing, or how should I interview people, or what are the best questions to ask? And even to this day, if we were to do a screen share, what you would do is you would type that in and you just get a bunch of articles that say, here are the 20 best questions. And that might be, and I love this company, but that article is from HubSpot, or that article is from Salesforce, or that article is from name another go-to-market CRM, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, like, thank you, person on the marketing team, for writing this. But like, why are you asking that question? To what kind of candidate? What are you looking to get out of it? What does it help you prove? How is that? How are you going to evaluate these different answers, right? And so, I think the big thing there is I need to have, not me, everyone needs to have a place to go, one place to go to get direct answers from people who are in it or have done it before. And then number two, for them to get more than just a question or something like that.
Right.
And so that is what I set out to do. So I was working a full time role at Handshake and really enjoyed it. And I kept seeing, okay, there is this need, there needs to be something done. And I've done interviewing at every company that I had been at. I had been working with recruiting teams and talent acquisition teams and HR teams. And then also I saw that there's just, besides LinkedIn, there isn't one place to go get these jobs to see that's posted. So what I started testing was, like, can I put together a jobs list for for sales roles, for customer success roles, and then also leadership level roles that sit above that? How do we get that out there? And so I started testing it, and there was a lot of people. So to this day, 2 years later, a lot of people who find those jobs. And I've had many people reach out to me and say, hey, I got a job because of that. Thank you so much. Or say, like, hey, I'm getting interviews. Or, hey, can you add my job? I'm an interviewer. There was a leader. I think she's a manager or director of sales development here in Brooklyn, actually. And she was unfortunately let go. She found one of the jobs on Dot Community's newsletters list, went through the interview process, was hired, came back to me, said, hey, I got hired to this. I want to post my job that I'm hiring for on this role. So it's really cool to see that full circle moment. But yeah, please go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I love that. I want you to spend a little time talking about what dot community is. I love it. I know what it is, but let's tell the audience what it is, how they can utilize it.
Yes, thank you so much. So, Dot Community is building the place to go to get better at interviewing sales and customer success candidates, but it's also for sales and customer success candidates because you can reverse engineer it, like I mentioned. So, we have the website, and we average over 5,000 unique visitors to that website every month.
That's
And that is to access one pagers, that is to access live webinar recordings with leaders. And there's a founder on there too who's talked about interviewing customer success people, articles. There's so many things where you can go to get better at interviewing, whether, again, you're the candidate or the interviewer. There's a free newsletter that goes out every week that lists out 10 jobs for SDRs and AEs, 10 jobs for CSMs, AMs, and then 10 jobs for leadership levels that sit above those. And it also gives an interview tip. And then there's a course. So there's a course that you can take, and it's an hour-long course, and it will certify you on how to interview sales and customer success candidates.
Oh, I love that. And when you think about career journeys, who would you recommend that to? I know it sounds like a nuanced question, but like, who would you recommend that to?
Yeah. Let's see. In terms of like where dot community will help people most, or
More specific. Well, actually, let me take a step back. Who would you recommend the course for? I feel like
uh,
that community itself can be. To, everyone should go on there. There's no reason why. I like every time you send a newsletter out, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a good question. What is this? Da, da, da. But I think for the course specifically, who would you recommend like where in their career would you recommend taking that course?
yeah, it's a really good question. So a few people. Number one, people who are not interviewers yet, but because they are thinking about becoming leadership level at one point, or they want to interview people at their organization. They're not there yet, but they want to do it. Definitely something for them. People who are currently interviewing, 100%, you should be doing it. And then I've had a lot of candidates who took it and said, hey, I never thought this would help, but it actually did. Specifically, candidates came back saying, well, I know I should be getting asked this question at this point of the interview process, or I know I shouldn't be asked that question. So it made me help make me a decision of, do I want to actually continue on the interview process with this company or not? So I would say people who are interested in learning how to get better at interviewing, but also people who are candidates who want to reverse engineer it as well.
I think that's awesome. I think that's a good point too. Like that, just getting that knowledge in to help yourself, but then also to think about like in the future, if you want whatever your aspirations are, if your aspirations is to be a leader, to interview people, even if you're a mentor and you're
Yeah,
helping practice with people, I think that that's really, really important.
you're 100%
Um,
right.
in your research, talking to CEOs and CHROs, was it obvious to them that the state of interviewing is broken, or was it just kind of like, like what was the thought process there?
Really good question. So for people who are not in the talent acquisition space, it was a no-brainer for them. They're like, yeah, you're right. But to be fair, that's one of many things on my list, right? So if you're, and you know this being a leader, yeah, you want to train somebody on how to interview, but you have to put out a customer fire or help a rep hit their goal or whatever it is. Like that's probably quote unquote more important than training people on how to interview. And so I understand that. I think that there is also the realization that we talked about. If you don't have the best people interviewing and you don't get hire the best people, that is going to hurt you in the long run in many different ways, financially, time, and there's plenty of other things we can talk about there. So that was on the non-talent acquisition side. There's a really unique situation going on the talent acquisition side where those people would say, we will provide base level training, which is legally what you can't say, and how do you remove bias from conversations, which are both very, very important. But that training is not always applicable for sales or customer success candidates. And the problem with that is there are a few consultants that do it and they're very good at it, but they're quite expensive, right? And so getting a line item approved on a profit and loss list or a budget list for that, when that could be seen as a talent acquisition organization's job, could be really tough to get approved. So it's this weird dynamic where there aren't a lot of people out there that can do that certification consulting wise. It's hard to find. It's expensive when you do find it. You might not get approval, or there are plenty of other fires we need to put out before we get to that. That is what I kept hearing, and why I wanted to create something that was affordable and accessible, which is why I created the dot community interviewer certification. But I do think there's still so much work to be done.
I agree. I definitely agree. I think one of the things that I'm hearing, going back to like bias, going back to thinking about how people are trained, something that came up a lot when I was either interviewing or an interviewer is how to remove certain biases out of the conversation. So, for example, I remember one time they're like, "Hey, we've got these two candidates. They're both really great. One is more polished than the other." And then I've got my whole team adopting that language. And I'm like, and we have, the round tables after you've interviewed everyone. And I'm
Yeah.
like, do y'all know what that means? And they're like, well, just like smoother. And I'm like, no, it's really a person, this person, from the way that they speak and the way that they articulate themselves, this is a person we'd rather have in front of our customers
Mhm.
versus the other candidate. Meanwhile, we believe that the other candidate is really strong, has a really strong sales knowledge. They might say like or a million times. They might stutter a little bit, but they might be a little bit more raw in the way that they speak.
Mhm.
But polished person is a safer bet. So having those conversations during the or the hiring process is something that I've personally seen because I've like had to do it, but we are not I don't think we're seeing that enough fighting for the I don't want to say the potential of a candidate because I feel like they're showing what they're able to do, but maybe that is it. Like fighting for the potential of a candidate instead of going what has been deemed status quo.
It's a really good point and very common. What you mentioned is very, very common. I think another thread that's very common is for, and I understand why, but a hiring manager or leader to come in and say, hey, I did not have a chance to evaluate X, Y, and Z with this candidate. Can you focus on that?
Mm,
When the interviewer who they're saying that to, their job is not to evaluate that. Their job is to evaluate ABC. And that really sways an interviewer, not only getting pressure from that kind of person to
mhm,
ask something, but the distraction to now not focus on that. And to your point, each one of these interviewers, and another good example with the word polished, right? If you're not evaluating just what you're supposed to evaluate, then in the grand scheme of all these things everyone else is supposed to evaluate, if you're missing that one piece, it's really tough for you as a hiring manager to make a decision on these candidates as a whole if you're missing different pieces of the evaluation, whether
mm,
that be sales acumen, presentation, ability to ask questions, ability to listen, objection reversal, you name it, right? All of these things.
mhm,
And so bias can come in many different ways. But going back to what you're talking about, I do think that your team being on the same page, understanding what different questions or why different questions are being asked, what you're looking to get, what good feedback looks like, and what bad feedback looks like.
mhm,
And this last one before, and I want to get your thoughts on this too. There's this really interesting story I had with a woman who was a part of the research I did. And she said that the way that they have these, how do they, I forget the term that they use, but it was like a hiring or an interview pull up after an interview where all of the people who had interviewed this candidate, they get on the phone with the person from talent acquisition or the recruiter, and they say, okay, everyone go around and give your feedback about this candidate. Well, if a leader goes first, says, I really like this candidate, but you as the interviewer say, I don't like this candidate or they didn't do well in this, now I'm like, I don't want to look bad in front of this leader. I don't want to tell this leader they did bad because I really need this hire, but I also need to be truthful with my organization and say this person didn't do too well.
mhm.
And so there's a lot of biases in that as well. And that reminded me when you said, okay, I look at my team and say, does everyone know what polished means? And they're like smoother, but that's not exactly what we're going to be talking about here. It happens time and time again.
No, it's so funny you say that because I remember I remember having again like being on the hiring side. I remember this young woman came through and she made it all the way to the final round, which was me. And at the time, being very transparent, at the time I was extremely overwhelmed. I had ran a department. I've got 33 people rolling up to me,
Wow.
and I am just trying to make it through the
Yeah.
day. We're also hiring for people that I feel like we don't necessarily need at this point. And so it was just like, okay, so I get in the interview and she's struggling like from the get-go, right? Like we had already told her like I want you to be able to pitch the product. You've had 3 interviews prior to this. You have a deep understanding of what the product is. Like just, do your pitch. And she couldn't get the pitch out. So I said, you know what? Forget this. Pitch where you currently work. Tell me why I should be interested in this company. This is something you're doing every day. So I was like, I understand that this could be a little nerve wracking, but if you're able to do your own company, this is something I could teach you. So she's like, okay. She couldn't get it out. She couldn't. It was like really unfortunate, and I really wanted to help her, but I was like, we don't have which I'm going to touch on this in a second, but I don't have the bandwidth to like hold your hand through this
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
I would love to, but I don't have the bandwidth. And that's not the, I don't, I'm not hiring for super entry level on my team because we don't have anyone to train them.
Right.
So I get into the round table and I'm like, hey, why did she make it so far in
Yeah.
the process? And they're like, well, we thought she would really want, we thought that you would really want to meet her. And I was like, why? And they're like, because, our pipelines, they've been all the same. And we thought that, like, you would really want to root for her.
Wow. This is interesting.
And I was just like,
Wow.
okay. I said, but, she couldn't, went through the whole interview. I was like, super nice girl. And they're like, oh, and I was like, well, guys, that's a waste of time and
And
resources.
money, yeah.
And money, and like it also is making me question having you all on the hiring board, because it's like, that is that what's
Can't
going
have
on
that.
here?
Can't
you,
have that.
without saying all the things, what's happening here? Because that makes absolutely no sense. And so it was at a point where we had to take a step back and restructure like our hiring team, and like really explain to them, like, hey, this is what we're looking for. This is the type of person that should make it to Mariah. And then if I wasn't the in hiring manager, if they were going to our CRO, this is the type of person that we should be looking to pass on to him.
Yeah.
So that was a reminder that we needed to like take a step back, because we're not aligned as a team
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it,
it's a really good point. I mean, I think that we talked about this before, but hiring managers and leaders, they have so many things going on, right? And so it's incredibly important to be dialed into a lot of things when you're recruiting someone, but particularly who we're looking for, why we're looking for them, and what we're looking to evaluate them on.
right.
And when there's not that it wasn't that y'all were completely aligned, but just there was, we wanted to take a chance on something, or we thought like when you said that immediately, I was like, oh, that says something to me,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, and to your point, I think a lot of organizations can do better with. I'm not saying your organization. I'm just saying in general can do better with setting the candidates up for success, but also they can do better with. I just got off the phone with the founder about this 2 hours ago. How do we set? They used to be called knockout stages, which I don't think is the best way to say it. But how do
Mm-hmm.
we set up an interview stage where it's very easy to decide who is if this candidate is what we're looking for, or if they're not. And
Mm-hmm.
to your point, as they get further in the process, there should be a higher level of a match of candidate we're looking for
Mm-hmm.
versus the reverse. So I like that you shared that. It's very interesting to hear.
Yes. No, I think it's important. I think that people should talk more about, to your point, like what type of candidate and the bandwidth and the resources that we have. When we had our sales manager, he was amazing, and he was a trainer. He was absolutely a trainer, and a manager, which are not always the same. Most
Right.
manager, I'm not. I can train you, I can coach you, but I'm not by nature a trainer.
Yeah.
Like that's not my, you know what I mean. I can teach you different things, but that's not my thing. So if you don't get my style of training, and
Yeah.
I don't have time to adjust to yours, I'm not a trainer. I'm very honest about that. But I will
Mm-hmm.
pair you with someone who is. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
enablement. I've done enablement, but it's not my thing.
Yes. Yes.
So when we were looking at like who's here, hey, I can take a chance on you because this sales manager is going to make sure that he can be with you every step of the way. Once he left, it's like, we don't have, if you come in here, we would be setting you up for failure just as much as we setting ourselves up for failure. And
Right.
I think that it's important to find a way to articulate that in the interview process.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. The best organizations who I see have the interview process down, setting candidates up for success, being very good at almost like upfront, setting like an upfront contract in sales, or being upfront and saying like, here's how this conversation is going to go. Here's what we're going to evaluate. I mean, when I interviewed, sorry that it's coming out this way, but that is what I did. Like I straight up
Right.
said, hey, here's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I'm evaluating.
Mhm.
Here's how I'm going to evaluate it. And I've also budgeted 10 minutes at the end for you to ask questions. And this is like a 30-minute call I would always have.
Mhm.
And, God bless them. I love these candidates, but some of these candidates, I would ask one question and it would be a 5 to 7 minute answer. We only have 15 minutes left, right? And you're going to get 10 of those minutes to answer questions. So what do you think is going to happen here?
Right.
Right. And like, to your point, I can't coach you or hold your hand on this interview process. And I know people get nervous. And trust me, I haven't been the best at all the interviews I've been in. So I'll raise my hand and say, I'm not the best interviewer or candidate. I'm trying to get better at it and I'm trying
Right.
to help people get better at it. But there's only so much you can do as an employer, leader, interviewer, and candidate.
No, I love that. I think that's spot on. I want to get into a little I'm going to just throw some things out there and I
Yeah,
want your
yeah.
like quick response to them.
You got it.
So, when we think about the ATS system, is the ATS kicking resumes out real or not?
That is such a good question. Haven't worked in that space in a little while, but I do know that there is artificial, like generative AI, that's inside of that and helping with a lot of the matching when it comes to resume stuff. In terms of like automatically keep kicking people out of the system, that had happened like in 2018 or something like that. Like that's been around. I don't know if it's still being leveraged because I think there are some laws that might debunk
Mhm.
that a little bit, but yes, unfortunately, when you have hundreds or thousands of candidates that are applying for your roles and you only have a few recruiters or whatever it may be, it is tough. I'm not giving employers an excuse, but
Mhm.
I am saying that I do think it can be something that's real.
Yeah, because I'm hearing that a lot. What I'm hearing specifically to kind of clarify for the audience too is that there are parameters put in place, right? Where the AI will go through and look for certain things in your resume. And then if those things have not matched, basically what Andrew said, like if it didn't match up, then that is where your resume may not make it all the way out the up the line. There are, but to the recruiter's point, there are a lot of recruiters who will go through resumes and use AI to like quickly rule people in or out. So it is really important to make sure that you're articulating your experience the right way. Um, Really quick on that is when you and I, way back, I was talking to you about different companies, and I'm
Mhm.
like, I keep getting people saying that I'm more operations than customer success, and I'm like, what
Mm,
is going on? And you were
yeah.
like, well, why are they asking you that? You need to look through your resume and figure out, and I took my resume, I copied it into ChatGPT, and I was just like, what kind of jobs would you associate me with? And they said customer success operations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so they're like, you're not talking enough about the books that you managed. You're not
Mm-hmm.
talking enough about SaaS companies. You're not talking like all of these things. So I'm like, oh, okay. So sometimes like I think candidates, speaking from experience, we're like, I know what I did. I know what I did. And
Yeah.
if you can't see that, something's wrong with you. And the reality is you need to take a step back and adjust.
Yeah, no, and you nailed it. And actually, I think that's the use case when I was talking about generative AI. That's the use case I was talking about, where people will go inside of a system, whether it's an applicant tracking system or another, and just like ChatGPT, I'll use that one for example. If you were to give it a prompt and ask for it to return things similar to if you were to go and do that with candidates, I'm looking for a director of customer success who has 5 years of experience managing these teams in this industry, then it's going to get, and to your point, if your resume is more focused on, like the bullets in your resume are focused on operational things versus managing teams, whatever that prompt may be, might show you something or return something different for that, the
Yeah,
recruiter, excuse me.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that that's a helpful piece of advice. When it comes to layoffs, would you give the advice? What advice would you give to the candidates about how to position their layoff?
Yeah, yeah, and I'll add another part in that too. It's a really good question. So the first part is the layoffs. If an employer brings it up, always be forthcoming in what truthfully happened,
Hmm.
and also say that maybe there might be, something different coming from the other side, your previous employer. Truth will always win in this. Unfortunately, interviewers and hiring managers, even if you tell them the truth, they will take it one way or the other. So that's the caveat I'm going to give you on that.
Mm-hmm.
but always be forthcoming. You don't want to get caught up with something later on in the interview. That could be really tough. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So always be upfront when you get asked that. Um, if you want to be forthcoming, or if you want to say that before, I should say, the employer reaches out to you and asks you about that, that's on. If you want to, sure, go ahead. I don't necessarily think about it that way, which
Mm-hmm.
now tailors into the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is the number one piece of advice I give candidates when they're asking me, how do I talk through a transition?
Mm-hmm.
Always talk about you running towards something versus running away from something. Any candidate who is speaking poorly, no matter if it's right or wrong, speaking poorly about the previous employer, if they're like, oh, if you were saying, hey, Andrew, like, help me understand why you went from handshake to lever. It should be, I was really excited about this opportunity. I was excited about working with these customers. I was excited about working with this team. I was excited. Like, that should be the thing you're talking about versus I really didn't like it at my last organization because A, B, C, D, whatever it is. No employer would want to, majority of employers would not want to hire somebody who is talking about that, even if it's true, because they're looking for somebody who's goal oriented, focused on the next thing and how they can support the team in a positive light versus trying to work with somebody who's so focused on the past and still clearly caught up with something, no matter what it was and who is right or wrong, that they're not talking about that in an interview where they're going to another role. So sorry, that wasn't a quick answer, but
No, but I made a note to myself. I was like, this is actually the best piece of advice I've heard about that because you typically hear just the latter of what you said. It's just like the employers don't want to hear about you talking bad about another company, whether it's true or not. But the reality of it is, or excuse me, the way you phrased it is you're running towards something
yeah,
and have and that spin on it, and here's all the things that I'm looking for or was looking for when I made that transition. I think that that's huge, and I think that that puts your brain in a different space when you talk about it. It's just
totally.
like, instead of like, yeah, they weren't paying me enough and they weren't doing, it's a different way to position that. So I absolutely love that. One other thing, how important is your LinkedIn to how important is an optimized LinkedIn to your journey of being interviewed? Like, where does that play?
Right, LinkedIn is so important. It is unreal to me. Like the last 2 years having started my own thing, but also realizing what LinkedIn can do for you, and also realizing the last 2 years, let alone 5 years, LinkedIn has become more of a social media, in my opinion,
Yes.
for good or for bad.
Yeah.
But specifically in the interview process, it is so important. Number one, it's a public profile, right?
Hmm.
So anybody who is interviewing you or a company that's interviewing you, that's before they even talk to you, that's how they get to know you. So be very, very strategic about what you put on there and how you present yourself, how you comment on things, what you're commenting on. Of course, do you and be you, but let's
Hmm.
be strategic, as I would say about
Yeah.
it. In terms of the interview process, both sides have to be using this. Like
Hmm.
interviewers have to be looking up who the candidates that they're talking to before.
Mm.
It doesn't always work out time wise. I understand that,
Hmm.
but and it may introduce some biases. I will accept that.
Yeah.
But it's important. It's important to look at the LinkedIn before so that you have context and understanding of who you're talking to.
Hmm.
But to answer your question, I hope I did. Maybe I missed it. So feel free to drive me in the right area. But LinkedIn as a candidate or an interviewer is really important for you to have your LinkedIn optimized to look the best and reflect who you are
Hmm.
as much as possible. The caveat there is my LinkedIn picture doesn't look that me. I get that. My dad told me I got to cut my hair. I got to lose 10 pounds. I'll get there one day. But
No, keep the hair.
besides that, LinkedIn is very important to have it optimized for interviewing.
Yeah, no, I think that that is so funny. Even when I met you, I was like, you don't look like your picture, but I love your style, so keep it. I told you that before. Leave like
You did.
it
You did.
fits you. It fits your personality. Like
Thank you.
very down to earth, very chill. Like that's the vibes you give off. So I like that. I like that.
Kind of. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. What about you did answer my question. I guess I'll go one more level deeper. What
Yeah.
about posts? Because you mentioned comments, and you kind of talked about this, like whatever you're putting on your LinkedIn. But would you encourage people who are in the job or looking to find a job to post, like
About
to
the
post?
job or about the
No, to
interviewing
post.
or
Yeah, sorry. Let me be more clear. Would you suggest candidates to post about their experiences or to post more? I'm seeing a lot of people not, they don't want to post on LinkedIn about
yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
understandably so.
Yeah.
But do you think that when they're looking through your profile, is that something that recruiters, hiring managers, or screeners are paying attention to, the things that you post, with the caveat of like obviously that you're not posting something crazy?
That's a really good question. So, two answers to that. Number one, there are people who really want there are hiring managers and companies who really believe in using LinkedIn as like a sales funnel, which I completely understand, and in from a customer success perspective as well.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people who want you to post.
Gotcha.
They want to see that. So as a candidate, how I would use what I just said is if I go to the people who I'm interviewing with or the company who I'm interviewing for, and they are posting a bunch and it's important to them, that's something that maybe I should think about.
Mm.
For the majority of the other people who aren't posting themselves as hiring managers or leaders or companies, or even if they are, I don't think that they are looking for everyone else to post to show that activity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that being said, I do think that it is very beneficial. It
Mm.
is very beneficial for, I'll give you an example. It's very beneficial for people who work in the space, even if you're a candidate now or you're not a candidate now, and at some point you will be a candidate, for you to engage with an audience on LinkedIn so that A, it opens up network conversations for you to have later on down the line, but B, it shows people that you have information that you can share. I'm not talking about post random things.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. There is a guy named Peter Walker who works at Carta. Carta is how do I want to describe Carta? I think it's fantastic. Carta is a platform that a lot of startups use to
Mm-hmm.
host the equity that they give their employees, that a lot
Mm-hmm.
of venture capital firms use with their investing vehicles, and that a lot of limited partners use to get to the venture capital. So there's like this ecosystem of data.
Mm-hmm.
Carta is posting this incredible data. I have zero affiliation with them, but this incredible data that helps people learn from actual numbers. So
Mm.
there's one thing that I just posted last week that was like, hey, if you were interested in understanding how your city metro is compared to getting paid in tech for a tech job in San Francisco or other places, you would be able to see that information, which is really helpful.
That
And
is really
so
helpful.
yeah, and so I'm saying like there are people who are posting things on LinkedIn with the data that they have or the customers that they're talking to, and that should be you. Not everyone can be Peter Walker at Carta. But
Right.
if you do have you're working with customers currently or you're working with data currently and it's something that can help people, I would say you should be posting about that as a candidate. If there's something that you did in the past and maybe you can't drop a customer name, but you can say like, hey, this is something that I worked or I did before and people will see that. They don't need to like or comment or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But if it goes through on your feed and like, wow, that's actually really helpful, you never know. So end of story is yes, post, be strategic about what you're saying. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it could lead to more conversations and maybe networking that you have later on down the line.
Yeah. And on that last piece, on networking, we call them informational interviews at the nonprofit that I work with. But like reaching out for virtual coffee chats, just connecting with people. What advice would you give to candidates about that process?
Really good question. Number one, know that everyone is getting hit up right now for like a, hey, can I pick your brain or coffee chat or something like that. So be very strategic about how you're doing it. I would say do it in two processes. Number one, try to get an introduction to somebody, build your network that way. And also make it easy for them, right? Like if I'm asking you to make an introduction to me for somewhere, and you've actually done this for really well, like you're incredible at this. People should take notes from you. Um, Make it easy. Say, hey, Mariah, can I forward you, or can I send you an email that you could forward to X person so I can get an introduction, or can I ghostwrite something for you that you can just copy and paste and send? Make it easy. If I'm a candidate who I'm asking somebody for an intro, hey, can you give me an intro to this hiring manager? Sure. Okay, well, can I write you an email you could forward on? Can I ghostwrite something for you? Can I give you my resume? Like how can I set you up for success? So in terms of networking, whether it's for a job or just networking, make it easy to get that introduction. The second thing is if you're going to reach out to this person who you want to talk to cold or point blank out of the blue, I should say, do it as if you are authentically interested in having a conversation with them. Not, I want to pick your brain about your company, or can you get me a referral to this job, or whatever it is. Like, it takes time. And to your point, when you're talking about managing 33 people under you and doing all these other things and being a superhero, no one has a lot of time in the day. We always wish there was more time in the day. So try to figure out, when you're sending that message, what's something that you can look at personally, again, on their LinkedIn or somewhere else, to say, how do I show this person that I'm not just reaching out to reach out? Like, hey, I just looked at your LinkedIn and I saw this and I'm going to reference it. I would love to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. And also, like, if they don't have time, they don't have time. But just like, know that you're a human, they're a human, and act upon it
No,
and with respect.
I think that that's so true because I love LinkedIn, but it has that email box, that message box gives me so much anxiety because
Yeah.
it is like a mixture of people who actually want to talk to you. There's a mixture of people who just want to sell to you. And like, granted, I get it, right? There's so much in there. And to that point, sometimes I'm reading stuff and it's just like, hey, it's just nice to connect. And I'm like, okay, nice to connect with you too. Being mindful of people and time, making it very easy for them. Something I teach my candidates and my clients, like help me help you, like you mentioned, like make it easy. Have a calendar invite or like I said before, there are people who have reached out to me and like, oh, it would be really nice to see this relationship grow. Oh, oh, okay. How shall we do that? All
Yeah.
I'm going to say is, okay, unless there's something like you might have been on my radar already and you reach out to me and I'm like, okay, it's a go, versus someone who maybe hasn't been on my radar for whatever reason. And if I've got 10 other messages coming in, like what stands out about yours? Like,
Yep.
what is it? Because I've got LinkedIn,
Yep.
I've got any other social media of people trying to reach me, I've got email, I work with 4 different communities, just like bringing people together. And so there's a lot there.
Yeah.
How do you stand out? My last question on this is, would you suggest voice notes? I'm seeing a lot
Mm.
of conversation about voice notes, and I'll just say this. I seen a thing and this lady was like on LinkedIn, she was like, you should suggest, you should do a voice note. It's going to make you stand out. And the first 3 comments was like, if you send me a voice note, I will block you. It's like, meanwhile, I am a lover of voice notes.
Yeah.
Give me a voice note. I think I've even sent you voice notes. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's your take on voice notes?
It's a really good question. I have seen and talked to a lot of hiring managers who, when it comes to candidates sending them stuff, voice notes and videos, they enjoy it. They don't always have time to get to them, but at least it shows, especially if your job is sales, that you're creatively trying to reach out in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, same thing as those 3 people who commented, like, I'm not going to listen to it. I don't care about it. Right. So, like, I totally understand that. I've had people reach out to me with voice notes and video notes, and I really respect that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have more time and ability to review those, and that's kind of what I'm focused on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it depends on the situation. I think that if you are interviewing, if you are a candidate who would like to interview for a job in sales
Mm-hmm.
or customer success, I think you should go for it. And if the hiring manager doesn't read it, or they're like, no, I don't think anyone should disqualify a candidate for that unless there's
Right.
something really inappropriate, which
Right.
obviously should not happen.
Right.
And it shouldn't be more than a 30-second, 60-second video.
Hello.
But
Yes.
yeah, come on. But yeah, I think to your point, definitely go for it. Not enough people are doing it.
Yeah, I definitely think it makes people stand out, like you said, and short. Keep it short. Don't
Yeah.
don't very short. I'm also seeing people post like tell me about yourselves
Hmm.
on LinkedIn, 2 minutes and under, which is also like the suggested videos they tell you for LinkedIn, like your videos really shouldn't be longer than 2 minutes, which
Hmm.
I agree with. It's short attention spans here.
Totally.
Um, very short. It's like there's just
Yeah.
so much going on. So you want, and I think for candidates, something to understand is you also are being evaluated on how well you can get a message across to a client or a customer.
Yes.
So if you're
Yes.
really struggling in your interview and you are unable to bounce back, even if you're unable to bounce back, like let's say in like a thank you letter, right? If you act, I just had a candidate who was like, listen, the lady was stone cold, and he was like, I came on ready, and she just looked like she wasn't interested in talking to me.
Yeah.
And he was like, so I know I didn't do a great job talking about myself, but I was able to articulate my skill set. But he was like, it was awkward. So it's like,
Yeah.
address that in your thank you, address that
Yeah.
in the follow up. And so he did. She wrote him back, and
Good.
it actually turned out really well. Well, so far, I don't know where it is now, but the response back was it's rare. It's rare that you get a response back to a thank you letter.
Totally. Yeah, I want to emphasize something you just said. If there's something that anyone could leave, at least my side of this podcast with today, it's what you just said, which is do the job before you have it, especially in sales and customer success. Do the job before you have it. Every single hiring manager that I've talked to for Dot Community, the newsletter, the website, anything, do the job before you have it. Show them. I'll use the example you said. Show them that you, in the follow up email, can take notes on based off of what the conversation was and connect the dots for them moving forward. Connect it in like an interview process. Connect from call number one to call number two to three, four, five, however. Hopefully, it's not one and five. Connect those conversations so that they can see here's what it looks like to have this person on my team. So I want to say you are 100% right. Do the job before you have it.
I love that. I was actually going to ask you what would be your final message. I like that one. Unless you have a doubt that, yeah,
That's it. That's it. Yeah,
that
do the
is.
job before you have it. And I think that, from an interviewer side, if there's one thing, always think about how you can set the candidate up for success, whether that's, the organization sends the candidate all the tools they need or all the information they need before the interview, or even just an interview. Like I said
Hmm.
before, I think, half an hour ago, which is like, get in the interview, say, this is who I am. This is who I'm going to, or this is why I'm interviewing you. This is what I'm looking for. I've also saved you time, 10 minutes or 8 minutes at the end for you to ask questions. That should totally make the candidate feel a little bit better, have a little bit more structure, allow them to focus a little bit more. And even if it's not, like you should know at the end, hey, this isn't what I was looking for. Or if it was, then you should be able to go forward from there.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I have had people do that for me, and I'm like, oh, this is easier. Or
Good.
I knew like, oh, I had to focus on this specific thing, so I feel prepared versus like the question coming out the blue, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do my best, but so I think that that's really important. Well, this has been amazing. I'm really excited that you came on the podcast today. I'd love for you to share just once more, and I'll also put this in the show notes. But I'd love for you to share where people can reach you, and talk a little bit about how they get into the newsletter and where they find the course.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, really enjoyed the conversation and love what you're doing, and it's really important. And I hope more people join in because it is important what you're doing. So for me, reach out on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Andrew Shapiro, and Dot Community. So it's a little period, and then Community is the name of the company that I created. You can find us at shap.community. And you can email me at andrew at shap, S-H-A-P, dot community. And yeah, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, message me. I'm usually pretty good at getting back to people and happy to help out. You can find the newsletter on shop.community, which is the website. You can also find the course. If you want to book time with me, you can do that. Everything you need is there. The resources, the free resources are there as well. But yeah, I just really enjoyed being on this podcast. And anyone that I can help, I would love to do that.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you all for listening. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Please like, share. and repost or reshare it with someone who this might help. Thanks again, and until next time. Thanks for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, share with a friend, comment below. The Grow in the Middle podcast is produced and edited by Mid-Century Marketing Company. We aim to create engaging and relatable content that helps you chart your own path to grow in the middle. I want to thank our wonderful guests, and especially you, the listener. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to let us know. Until next time.